Welcome to our deep dive into Leviticus. We've got quite the source material here, excerpts from the book itself. Now, I know Leviticus can seem a little intimidating with all those rules and regulations, but we're going beyond that today. We're going to uncover the why behind the what.
Absolutely. Leviticus might look like a rule book at first glance, but it's a glimpse into a whole worldview. It's all about purity, holiness, and how humanity relates to the divine.
So let's jump right in. The book starts with these instructions for burnt offerings, where, you burn the whole animal on the altar.
Yeah, the burnt offering, it's a powerful image, right? It symbolizes total surrender, like giving your best to God. And what's interesting is this idea of sacrifice. It pops up in other religions too, even outside religion. Think about athletes training for years, sacrificing time, comfort to be the best.
That's a really interesting point. It's like this ancient ritual is tapping into something very human, that willingness to give something up for something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And Leviticus is very specific about the type of animal for these offerings. It depended on the person's social status.
Right, so a ruler might offer a bull, but someone less well-off could offer a pair of doves, or even just grain. Seems pretty progressive for the time, recognizing everyone could approach God, regardless of wealth.
Yeah, it emphasizes that it's the act of sacrifice that matters, not the material value of the offering.
And then we have meal offerings. They seem a bit less intense than those burnt offerings. It's more like fine flour, oil, frankincense. Sounds kind of delicious, actually.
The meal offering is all about the everyday stuff, the sustenance of life, the sweetness. It's acknowledging God's role in even the ordinary things. And there's this interesting detail where the priest burns a memorial portion.
A memorial portion. What was the point of that?
Well, it was a symbolic reminder of the offering. It connected the actual offering to like a spiritual reality and this idea of remembrance, commemoration. It's a big deal across so many cultures. Think about war memorials, birthdays, even just family photo albums. It's all about holding on to something, connecting to something bigger.
Like that little bit of flour represented so much more a connection to God, a reminder of blessings.
Exactly. And then you've got the peace offerings. They seem to be about, well, peace and community, right?
Right. Peace offerings involved burning an offering for God and then, get this, a shared meal between the priests and the person who made the offering. Sounds like a pretty good deal.
It was all about unity, a harmonious relationship with God and the community. The shared meal really symbolized that. And there were some specific rules, too, like not eating the fat or blood.
Why not? Was it like a taboo thing?
More like sacred. The fat was seen as the richest part, so it was dedicated solely to God. The blood symbolized life itself, which also belonged to God. These restrictions were about respecting the divine and the sacredness of life.
I see. Even in a simple meal, there was deeper spiritual meaning. Kind of reminds me of how some cultures have rituals around food, like saying grace or fasting for religious reasons.
You got it. It shows how intertwined the spiritual and the everyday were for the ancient Israelites.
Okay, we can't talk about Leviticus without discussing sin offerings, right? These are about facing up to our imperfections, aren't they?
Yeah, sin offerings were specifically for unintentional sins, those mistakes, not deliberate wrongdoing. The ritual involved putting some of the sacrificial blood on the altar, representing purification and reconciliation with God.
It's interesting that there was a separate category just for unintentional sins. Why do you think that was so important for them?
Well, it acknowledges that we're not perfect. We're going to mess up sometimes. But it also provides a path back to a good relationship with God. It's not about punishment, but forgiveness and making things right. It's a very human need, that need for second chances.
Absolutely. Leviticus then gets into all these priestly duties. It's pages and pages of instructions about maintaining the altar fire, handling the offerings, and making sure everything's done correctly.
Yeah, the priests were like mediators between God and the people. They had to follow all these rituals perfectly to maintain holiness and order. Think of them as the guardians of the sacred.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility. Makes you wonder if they felt the pressure with everyone watching them all the time.
I bet they did. But it was a very respected role, too. They were entrusted with really important duties. What they did had consequences for everyone. A heavy burden, but also a great honor.
And then there's this whole idea of purity and holiness that runs through the whole book. We see it in the rules about food, the whole clean and unclean animals.
Those dietary laws might seem strange to us now, but for the Israelites, it was about separating the sacred from the ordinary. A way to set themselves apart, to live in a way that reflected their special relationship with God.
It's like these rules about food were actually about something much bigger, their identity as God's chosen people. Do you think these rules helped create a sense of community?
Oh, absolutely. Even practices that seem restrictive to outsiders can really bring people together. It's about belonging, sharing a purpose. Think about how dietary practices still define some religious and cultural groups today. It's a way to connect to something bigger, to live out your beliefs.
Okay, so we've covered burnt offerings, meal offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, priestly duties, and this idea of purity.
Hmm.
Feels like we've only just scratched the surface of Leviticus.
Oh, there's so much more to uncover. We haven't even touched on the Day of Atonement, all the forbidden practices, the festivals, the punishments. It's like a tapestry of rituals, laws, and teachings. It takes us deep into a way of life that still resonates today.
Well, I'm ready to keep going.
Let's do it. We're about to explore some really powerful and thought-provoking parts of Leviticus. Get ready. So we were talking about holiness, right? Leviticus gets even deeper with this idea in chapter 16. It describes the Day of Atonement, this really intense ritual cleansing the whole nation from sin.
Yeah, the Day of Atonement always fascinated me. They used two goats, right? One was sacrificed, the other one, the scapegoat, was sent off into the wilderness carrying all the people's sins.
Such a powerful image, right? The scapegoat carrying all that burden banished to this empty wilderness. This ritual gave the Israelites a concrete way to see their sins being taken away, like a clean slate. You can almost feel this collective sigh of relief as that goat walks away.
It's interesting, this scapegoat idea.
Yeah.
Putting blame or guilt onto something else. It pops up in other cultures too. Even in psychology today, we don't send goats into the wilderness anymore, but the idea is still there.
It is. It shows you how some human experiences are universal, that need to deal with guilt, shame, all the bad stuff we do. So, after dealing with all that sin, Leviticus shifts to personal behavior. Chapters 18 to 20 list all these forbidden practices. We're talking sexual immorality, social injustice, religious stuff like idolatry and sorcery.
Wow, that's quite a list. It covers a lot, doesn't it? What do you think was the point of listing all those things in such detail?
It's about setting boundaries, ethical ones, ritual ones. These laws set the Israelites apart from everyone else. It reinforced their unique identity. It's about creating a specific moral and social structure, a way of life that's different.
It makes you think about rules and boundaries. Even if they seem restrictive, they can create order, a feeling of security, like a framework for living. Everyone knows what's okay and what's not.
Exactly, and within that framework, some people had more responsibility, needed to be more pure, especially those in charge. Chapter 21 focuses on the priests, particularly the high priest. He was the one who went into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, remember?
All right, there were all those rules for them. Marriage, contact with the dead, even physical imperfections. It's like they were held to a higher standard of purity because they were so close to God.
Exactly. They embodied holiness. They represented that sacredness, being mediators between God and the people. It's like they had to reflect the purity they were trying to create in the community. And talking about offering the best to God, chapter 22 gets into what offerings are acceptable, especially animal sacrifices.
I noticed they emphasize using unblemished, healthy animals.
Yeah.
It's like offering anything less would be insulting to God.
It showed a deep respect for God, a desire to offer the best. You gotta remember, animals were very symbolic in ancient cultures. A flawed animal would have been disrespectful, a lack of devotion. It's about offering something worthy.
It's funny how we still use the word sacrifice today, even outside religion. We talk about sacrificing time, energy, resources for something we believe in.
It is interesting how these old ideas still stick with us. They shape our language, how we understand commitment and dedication. Speaking of shaping time, Leviticus has a whole chapter on festivals and holy days.
Chapter 23, right? The Sabbath, Passover, Feast of Weeks, Day of Atonement, Feast of Booths. Sounds like a busy year.
These festivals had lots of purposes: marking time, celebrating harvests, remembering historical events, and most importantly, strengthening their relationship with God. They created a rhythm to life, a way to connect, with God and each other through rituals and celebrations.
It's amazing that some festivals, like Passover, are still celebrated today, connecting people to their ancient heritage. It shows you the power of these rituals.
It's about remembering your roots, who you are, what you believe in. These festivals pass down for generations. They're anchors of identity and faith.
After all that celebrating, chapter 24 brings us back to reality, laws and punishments. I was really struck by the part about blasphemy, the harsh consequences for disrespecting God's name.
Blasphemy was serious business back then. It shows how important it was to respect God. You see that reverence in many religions, acknowledging a power greater than ourselves, treating it with respect.
And then there's that famous phrase, an eye for an eye. Seems pretty harsh today. How did that fit into their idea of justice?
You got to remember the context. Back then, it was more about fairness in punishment, making sure things were proportional, not excessive. It was about creating balance, preventing violence, and revenge.
So more about accountability than actual revenge.
Yeah, exactly. It was about setting boundaries, consequences, making sure the punishment fit the crime.
And then we get to chapter 25, which introduces those interesting ideas, the sabbatical year and the jubilee.
These show a real concern for social and economic balance. The sabbatical year, letting the land rest every 7 years, that was about conservation, preventing soil depletion. They understood that even the earth needed a break.
Like they were into sustainability way before it was trendy.
Right. They understood how everything's connected, the balance of nature. And then you have the Jubilee, which was even more radical.
The jubilee, yeah. Every 50 years, debts were forgiven, ancestral lands returned. It sounds like a system designed to stop a few people from hoarding all the wealth and power.
It was. It leveled the playing field, gave everyone a chance to thrive. It stopped families from falling into permanent poverty and kept land within families. Pretty amazing example of an ancient society trying to deal with social justice and economic inequality, issues we're still dealing with today.
It is remarkable, considering the time. Challenges our assumptions about ancient societies. It shows they weren't just about rituals and sacrifices, but about creating a fair society.
Exactly. Leviticus shows us a world that was deeply spiritual and concerned with the well-being of the community.
And that concern is clear in chapter 26. It describes the blessings for obedience and the curses for disobedience. It lays it all out, the rewards for following the covenant, the consequences for breaking it.
It's like the carrot and stick approach to keeping the covenant. Obey, and you get blessings. Prosperity, peace, God's favor. Disobey, and you get curses. Disease, famine, exile. Pretty strong motivation to follow the rules.
Some people might see this as a very black and white view, right? Like a simplistic idea of reward and punishment. But do you think there's a deeper message?
I think it's about the connection between actions and consequences. That's something that's always true in any culture. It's a reminder that our choices have an impact on ourselves and everyone around us. It's about living with purpose, understanding that what we do shapes the world.
I like that. It's not about blind obedience or fear of punishment. It's about understanding how our choices matter and trying to live in a way that matches our values. As we get to the last chapter of Leviticus, it seems fitting that it's about vows and tithes, ways people could show their devotion and support the community.
Chapter 27 lays out the rules for dedicating people, animals, or property to God. It gave people a structured way to make offerings, to show their commitment, their gratitude, but it also understood that people had different means. There was a system of valuation and redemption, so it was flexible based on what people could afford.
So it wasn't just about the rich making big gestures. Everyone could participate in a meaningful way.
That's it. It was about balancing honoring God and recognizing human limitations, creating a system that was both spiritually significant and practical.
Okay, so we've gone through the rituals, the laws, the punishments, the festivals, the social structures, and ways people showed their devotion in Leviticus. It's been quite a journey. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from this book?
What's really interesting is how Leviticus shows us a society trying to live in a right relationship with God and with each other. It's about creating a way of life that affects everything: what they ate, how they treated their neighbors, how they celebrated their history and beliefs. It reminds us that spirituality isn't just what you believe, it's how you live, how you interact with the world, and how you build a just and compassionate society.
That's a message that still resonates today, thousands of years later. It makes us look at our own lives, our values, and ask ourselves how we're living our purpose, how we're connecting to something bigger than ourselves.
And that's the power of these ancient texts. They hold up a mirror, make us confront our assumptions, consider new ideas. They invite us to have this conversation that goes beyond time and culture.
It's been an amazing deep dive so far, but there's still one part left. Ready to finish this up?
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear what final thoughts and insights come up as we finish our journey through Leviticus.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Leviticus, I'm really struck by, well, the depth of it all. This book is often seen as just a list of rules, but it reveals so much about, this ancient desire to connect with God, to live ethically, to create a fair society.
It's amazing how Leviticus ties all these themes together, the spiritual and the practical, the personal and the communal. For the Israelites, it was all connected. It wasn't enough to just go through the motions. They had to live their faith in every aspect of life.
Yeah, holiness wasn't just about avoiding certain foods or doing certain rituals. It was a way of being, a way of living in the world that reflected their covenant with God.
You got it. And that's the hard part, isn't it? It's easier to follow rules than to actually live by certain values. Leviticus challenges us to go deeper, to really understand the meaning behind all those rituals and laws.
One thing that keeps coming up for me is this idea of sacrifice. We see it with the burnt offerings, sin offerings, even the scapegoat. What do you think this tells us about how the ancient Israelites saw the world?
Sacrifice was at the heart of their relationship with God. It was how they acknowledged their dependence on the divine, how they atoned for their mistakes, how they sought blessings. But it went beyond just religion, too. Think about the sabbatical year. Letting the land lie fallow, that was a sacrifice. Recognizing that even the earth needed to rest. And the Jubilee, with its debt forgiveness and return of property, that was sacrificing wealth for the sake of social balance and the well-being of the community.
So it wasn't just about giving something up. It was about recognizing something bigger, making choices that benefited everyone, not just yourself.
Exactly. It was about understanding that true well-being for everyone depended on having a right relationship with God, with each other, and with nature. It's a very holistic vision, one that still has meaning today, for how we see our place in the world.
As we've been talking about all this, I've been thinking about the connections to our own time. We might not have burnt offerings and scapegoats, but we still struggle with those same questions. How to live ethically, how to create a just society, how to find meaning and purpose.
Right, that's what's so great about these ancient texts. They go beyond their own time and speak to something universal about being human. They make us ask those big questions. What are our values? What are we willing to sacrifice for? How are we contributing to making the world a better place?
Leviticus, with all its rules and rituals, really does point us back to those fundamental questions. It reminds us that holiness is more than just outward actions. It's about cultivating a sense of reverence, compassion, and a commitment to justice within ourselves.
And that's a journey we all have to take in our own way. Leviticus gives us a guide, but it's up to us to find our own path, to figure out how to live these ancient teachings in our modern world.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive into Leviticus has been a real eye-opener for me. I have a whole new understanding of this book and the wisdom it holds.
I've really enjoyed exploring these ideas with you. And to everyone listening, we hope this has sparked your own curiosity about Leviticus. Don't be afraid to dig in, ask those questions, and challenge what you think you know. There's always something new to discover.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.